Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This week really seems to be a week of basically daily uploads, daily live streams. I'm very glad I'm able to provide that. My work schedule allows it, my energy levels allow it, and thankfully, that cold I've been coming up with seemingly has either stopped or has gone away entirely. So if I sneeze somewhere in between, let's hope that's the last vestiges of that little cold. And that I will be able to keep streaming throughout the week. The last couple of videos have actually performed pretty well, especially a lot of people watching live, interacting live. Love that. Love the audience letting me know what they think, what they agree with, what they disagree with. And beyond all of that, I'm just very grateful to have you along, to know your opinions, to learn from you even. I'm not claiming to know everything. I know some people do. One example here being that I haven't even heard of that guy. He's apparently a professional photographer, Tony Northrup, and he's a YouTuber. He's saying that Apple is lying about the iPhone 16 Pro 48 megapixel camera, saying that the 48 megapixel claim is absolutely fake. By the way, megapixels are not measured by their size or whatever. That might be a real world difference between, for example, during my last stream, I've actually pointed out that like a full frame camera will be like 6, 7, 8 times larger than a popular smartphone main camera, and like 20 times larger than like the most ultra wide cameras, and even like 30 times larger than the telephoto cameras that you see in today's smartphones. So I can see some of the points he's trying to make, but this idea that it makes the 48 megapixels false, which by the way, you don't even have to do quad pixel binning. You can do just full resolution Pro RAW or even now JPEG XL stuff. I believe you can even do 48 megapixel just HEIC or no, HEIF. I always forget which one is which, even though we just looked it up like 2 streams ago. Let me quickly have a look. HEIF, high efficiency image format. Right, that's what other people call HEIF, but I refuse to call it HEIF because of an I in the name. So again, some absolutely nonsensical statements. Maybe if by the weekend we don't have that much new stuff, I could debase myself to watch the video that he provided. Most people who are actually professional photographers as well, who actually interact with the iPhone's camera. By the way, this guy hasn't even touched the iPhone 16 yet. So his statements about the 16 Pro are just like, I guess, generalized like a superiority complex of like a real photographer versus smartphones. Yeah, but when I claim that I don't know everything. Well, I don't not know anything, but yeah, I will absolutely never make statements like that because there's absolutely a part in me that has humility, that absolutely knows what I'm doing here is a hobby. I love doing it on the side. I love that my work schedule currently allows it. I love that you guys tune in to let me know that you actually enjoy it. I love that you guys then find me on Twitter so we can interact a little bit over there. That's what I'm doing this for. I'm not claiming to know everything, but I'm definitely smarter than a guy who says shit like this. Not in like, oh, I will know everything about photography better than him, but sometimes you know how intelligent a person is or how honest they are. That should also be said. Just based on like, if they are in a certain profession, they should know better than make certain statements. Like, for example, I'm in the medical field. Like, whenever I find a doctor who makes like ridiculous conspiratorial statements about COVID and the COVID vaccines, right? Not like reasonable like suspicions like, oh, did it maybe come from like a gain of function lab or something like that, but like, no, it was released by George Soros and we actually got all microchip implants together with the vaccine and stuff like that. Like if I ever hear a doctor say that, I probably would talk to like the medical association here and have them like I don't know if that's the correct word for a doctor. That's the correct word for lawyers. Like, I would have them probably disbarred because such a person shouldn't be treating patients. And yeah, like, and this person probably just wanted to get clicks. It didn't even really like get a lot of steam, that controversy, right away. I believe it happened like 3 or 4 days after the video has actually been posted. It's about a week old, so it predates any kind of when he could have actually provided a review or anything like that. Yeah, but if you ever wonder, like, am I stupid? Maybe I'm stupid, but I'm probably humble enough to not speak so much that you will actually see that too much, how stupid I might be. So sometimes definitely silence is gold in this case. Jan, guten Tag, der Herr. Welcome to the stream, brother. You have been watching diligently recently. That's very, very much appreciated. I started with a little bit of a rant here. That's not actually the topic of the day, not even the other topics that I actually have here in like article form are not even the topic of today either. We are gonna watch both SuperSaf's camera comparison of the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Galaxy S24 Ultra, and we're gonna watch Mrwhosetheboss's video basically with the same concept. Now, I have already been spoiled that both of them have declared the iPhone 16 Pro Max to be the winner. I have also seen the point like, let's say, balance of Mrwhosetheboss's video, where it was surprisingly close in a way, but knowing that he also adds a lot of iffy categories like AI stuff, I'm probably going to disagree with some of the methodology of basically just throwing away points. But that's neither here nor there. Those are our main topics basically of today. I know, but believe me, guys, I know I have seen your clamors on Twitter and stuff like that. I know that, for example, the MediaTek 9400 has leaked, right? Like 2-3 days ago, we get results in the single cores of around 2900 to as high as 3100. Multi-core results of between 8800 and 9200. And this seems actually like a production ready device, so it's not running at a ridiculous 18 watts like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4 sample that we saw. Believe me, I know all of that. I also know of Geeker Van's video of the A18 and the A18 Pro, and I will definitely react to that. I understand there is actually demand for it. I wish there was an English-speaking video of that, because I know some stuff just gets lost in translation on the Geeker Van stuff. I already have some problems with some of their methodology. Again, they basically declare the A18 Pro the best current chip right now in most ways. Like, I am not saying that they're bad in any ways because they don't like kiss Apple's butthole enough, right? And saying, what a delicious apple. Like, no, like, I actually have trouble with some of their methodology. I've actually covered it in some videos. But yes, I know there is chip stuff, there is competition stuff, there is controversy for stuff like the camera. We are going to cover the camera today, which is ironic because I actually wanted to cover regular reviews today in the form of the video from The Verge, but we actually ended up, well, basically reviewing like a camera review because that's what The Verge seemingly only wanted to talk about. So we will be talking about the camera, I presume, for at least until the end of the week, because while I won't have time for it probably today, I also do want to review the video from the Petapixel guys. And maybe I will do that. Actually, I might do a double feature, maybe tomorrow, maybe on Saturday. Depends on if other information comes out. and then I would like to watch the review from this, what is this person called? Tony Northrup, and then counterbalance it with the Petapixel guys, because they actually have made the statement contradicting what he has said here. And of course, they have their own dedicated camera review of the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So that I think will be a very interesting, like kind of how I want to make a double feature of today's video. I think it will be interesting to make a contrasting double feature out of those two videos. Jan saying, you're saying a good camera alone is not enough. It serves you little if you have a good camera, but you cannot take photos. Well, there are 2 points about taking photos. For one is, do you actually have something worth taking photos of, right? Do you have a significant other? Do you have kids? Do you go on beautiful scenic walks? Do you take nice vacations? Are you just a self-absorbed Instagram influencer who constantly takes selfies of yourself, right? And then, of course, to a lesser degree, because smartphones are kind of built for that, is, are you actually good at taking photos? Now, smartphones are kind of designed to help you along with that. A lot of the pre-built color science stuff, even how portrait mode is like can be very aggressive, which usually, like, yes, a professional like mirrorless camera, it will give you a very great natural bokeh depth of field, but properly adjusting it can be a little fidgety. While with the iPhone, you don't even have to switch to portrait mode these days. You just take a regular photo, and if you took it with enough data, basically, you can adjust the portrait mode afterwards entirely. So yeah, I fully understand. Of course, like, the camera is also not an argument for everyone, right? I take like one vacation a year at most. I haven't even taken one last year, like nothing serious. I currently don't have a significant other. I can definitely tell you that I've taken a lot more photos when a woman was living in my household. And stuff like that changes, so I absolutely understand that for some of you, like, the need for a better smartphone camera will also vary. And Angelica is joining the chat. Saying she finds the topic fascinating. I love that my German viewers have seemingly decided to join me simultaneously. With Angelica also being here, I wanted to do a shout out to everyone doing the YouTube jazz before we get fully started, because obviously we need to keep growing the channel, keep growing the community. So to anyone who hasn't subscribed yet, please subscribe, please like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment live. I love interacting with you guys, but also please comment afterwards, because my videos get actually a decent amount of views these days, but the comments really are rather lackluster, because I know most of you just choose to wait until you can join live and actually interact with me live, which I really understand, I really appreciate, but still feel free to leave an actually regular comment. That helps tremendously with the algorithm. And if you're watching this really enjoying digging the content, please consider leaving us a small donation. Again, I'm talking in pluralis majestatis, or I'm talking like Golem with himself when I say leave us. This channel is just me. Please leave this channel a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker, or consider supporting this channel directly in the long run with by becoming a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Fizz, and Max Maximus, whole Martech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. And beyond that, you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Yeah, Jan, I fully understand. You won't become a great photographer by having a decent camera, but a decent camera in many ways definitely helps. It just should be acknowledged that a great photographer will even take great photos with something like an iPhone 7, right? And then they will take absolutely phenomenal photographs with something like an iPhone 15 or 16 Pro. And then, of course, if you move like a layman, and I don't want to call laymen stupid, because they aren't. They just have other things they focus on in life. And if you give them an iPhone 7 Plus, except for probably portrait mode photos, most of and like if they happen to capture like a beautiful landscape, the results will probably not be too impressive. Once you consider giving them a 16 Pro, which obviously has the larger sensors, the better image signal processing capabilities, now they will have a better chance of capturing a good photo. That doesn't make them great at later editing the photo and stuff like that, but it definitely still helps. It's better than not. Plus, a lot of us just want to have a vibrant, sharp, in focus picture and videos of our kids, of our hobbies, of the landscapes we see in life, and there you don't need to be a great photographer to have a photo that has an emotional connection with you personally, right? But yeah, for example, if somebody wanted to have like a wedding photographer, right? Would I prefer a professional photographer with an iPhone versus a layman with like a mirrorless professional camera? I would choose the professional photographer with an iPhone. But that depends also on which iPhone, because if you told me that professional photographer would now have to work with an iPhone 6 or 6S, well, now I would start considering the layman with the professional camera. So it's all a balance. Yeah, so that's about it for today's intro. I know I've been a little bit rambly. There are two pieces of actual news I wanted to discuss before we get into the full-on reactions. Starting with, well, both of them are actually chip-related. First comes from what some people love calling the randomly accurate digitimes, because it's seemingly like throwing a coin with them sometimes. They're saying that next year's Wi-Fi should be getting Apple's own designed Wi-Fi chip, so that would be a move away from their current supplier Broadcom. That of course comes right after iPhone 16. Both 16 and 16 Pros have introduced Wi-Fi 7, so remains to be seen if Apple can match that right away. I would be very surprised if they didn't. Like the iPad Pro right now is on Wi-Fi 6E. Like I just don't see a way in which they bother to make an own Wi-Fi modem that isn't like Wi-Fi 7, right? Because even Wi-Fi 7 will it someday get a successor. So making 6E the baseline would already be kind of disappointing. Obviously, if they make it just a Wi-Fi 6 modem, then it's probably only coming to like the cheapest iPads or whatever. But yeah, definitely an interesting development, because we of course all know like that Apple purchased like the Intel modem business for cellular stuff, right? So we have expected Apple to come up with a modem that competes with Qualcomm for a while. But seemingly Wi-Fi might actually be ready first, so that would be quite interesting. Of course, it might be combined with something like their 5G modem, which might be a good way for Apple in future to save on production cost. So again, we've talked about the iPhone 17 Air getting like the new 5G modems. Maybe those rumors kind of overlap. Maybe there's something wrong. Maybe it won't actually be like the iPad's getting it first. Instead, will be the iPhone. So those rumors are always a little bit in flux, especially when the presenter of them is something like Digitimes. So take it with a grain of salt, but definitely would be interesting. Next is probably some bad news. Now, again, this is coming from Min-Chi Kuo, who is not as reliable as he once was. That being said, he is still reliable enough for me to at least mention when he says something, and he claims that the processors for the 2025 iPhone 17 models will be made by TSMC's N3P processor, which is of course in the 3nm broader family, which includes N3B, which was what A17 Pro was made on, and N3E, which is what A18 Pro is now made on. The processor for 2016 iPhone 18 models, God, I hope that Apple changes iPhone branding at that point. Like 17 and 18 really starts looking ridiculous once you reach like such high numbers. It's anticipated to use TSMC's 2nm technology. However, due to cost concerns, not all new iPhone models may be equipped with a 2nm chip. So I would would assume at that point Apple would then reuse the A19 chip in the base models of the 2026 iPhones, and then the A20 chip would then be a 2nm chip. Now again, this goes against some of the rumors that we've heard that 2nm might be ready for a 2025 iPhone, or at least like a Mac maybe. So that is actually interesting. Of course, the fact that he says that he only talks about iPhones here, so there's still room that maybe 2nm might still come earlier than like what would be the second half of 2026. We have, of course, all been surprised when the iPad Pro this year ended up with an M4 chip and not an M3 chip, and it was based on N3E rather than N3B. So maybe Apple could surprise us in a similar way, but maybe on a similar, actually smaller, way, right? Because the iPhone, of course, is a big surprise if it happens to have a Note we didn't expect. But if Apple can maybe push in an iPad in between, or a Mac that actually has like an M5 or at this point an M6 chip or something like that, and it happens to be 2nm earlier than we expected, then there's still opportunity for us to be surprised. That being said, Mrwhosetheboss can still be wrong, but I just wanted to mention this because I do have a long-standing bet running with Vadim Yuri from MaxTech, because I said that Apple will launch at least one 2nm base chip next year. So Mrwhosetheboss is seemingly betting against me here, but we'll have to see how that actually pans out. So that's about it for today's news. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's video. Let's start with SuperSaf and then move on to Mrwhosetheboss. And let's see how the iPhone 16 Pro Max fares against, like, the Galaxy S24 Ultra. Let's be honest, is not even the best Android camera flagship at this point in many ways. Like, the Pixel is inarguably, I would argue, better in most ways, at least a little. And then a lot of Chinese competition, while I would argue they're worse in many ways, they do often have larger sensors, especially for something like their telephoto cameras. They are seemingly now are bringing back like 10x after Samsung like removed it. So for very specific tasks, I would definitely favor like a Xiaomi or an Oppo device. But as an overall product, I would still favor the Samsung, even in camera. That's what I'm trying to say. And Relay, welcome to the stream. You have also been watching diligently the last couple of streams. Welcome to the chat, brother. You like missed out on a little bit of intro banter, but you're just in time to watch the actual reaction/analysis portion of this video. So let's get started.
As always, we'll be testing out every single aspect of the cameras. There will be chapters down below. Let's do it. So we're going to kick off with some photos from the primary cameras. And after taking hundreds of images from both devices, I'd say both, once again, are very, very good. Lots of detail and great dynamic range. Now, dynamic range can differ depending on the image. So, for example, here, the iPhone is doing a better job of maintaining those highlights.
I mean, those are both good images. When it comes to general color stuff, I would argue that the Galaxy is almost instantly recognizable as being oversaturated. But I know some people like the look. And again, the Galaxy S24 Ultra does have its own like Pro RAW like mode, though it is more raw than Pro RAW in that regard, which means that you definitely need to edit it more than Pro RAW. Which is definitely a little bit less consumer-centric. Like, I dislike the idea, and I will be 100% intellectually honest here, because I've said that in the past when the iPhone was worse, so I'm saying it now that the iPhone is better. I don't think that exposing a tiny bit better for the sun here, it means that it's so much better at HDR, right? It definitely brings up shadows more, which what we've heard The Verge complain about. You can see that the shadows on the Galaxy are definitely darker, actually. Which again, I'm sure that if you look actually at the 15 Pro Max, you would find the Galaxy S24 Ultra pretty much stuck in the middle between those. But yeah. I guess you could argue that what the iPhone does actually does make it look a little more flat. Again, it's very easy to customize those things on the iPhone in a way it's not on the Galaxy. Like you can, of course, don't get me wrong, you can customize exposure levels and stuff like that on the Galaxy S24 Ultra. It has its own Pro mode in the actual camera app. But what I'm talking about is not impacting the actual computational pipeline too much with that, which is, of course, what the iPhone allows with now its moods and photographic styles. I even forget what all those different undertones are all called. So in these two cases, I do prefer the iPhone image, but I do not prefer it for better HDR. I just prefer it for like the grass looking a little bit more realistic. But beyond that, I think HDR is good on both. It's obviously better on iPhone, but it didn't bother me that the iPhone 15 Pro Max might struggle with this in a similar way like the S24 Ultra does. Nor am I delighted by the idea that the 16 Pro Max now handles it even better. Yeah. So small wins wherever you can take them, I guess.
Whereas the S24 Ultra has blown those out. However, in this example, I think the Samsung has maintained the shadow details better compared to the iPhone.
Really, this video is basically all about cameras. It's not like the Verge's review though. Those are actually fair like counterpoints in how it's handled.
Now, one thing that I noticed
what did
is
you say?
Samsung has maintained the shadow details.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Like, I guess you could argue that you can correct for that very easily afterwards. Like, I'm not a big fan of saying, oh, it need like you see what now Samsung does here. It does exactly. This is why I didn't get the vitriol from the video from The Verge yesterday. Like you can see that the iPhone gives you much more shadow, accepts the fact that some things might actually look dark. If you have like sun in the way, right? That's even how our eyes work to a degree, right? So this idea that, oh, this is darker, so yeah, really, of course, you aren't forced to watch every stream of mine. Your support is already welcome. So, but I was just going to warn you about, I know you meant my stream. I meant like this stream is going to focus on cameras because the two videos I'm watching today are all focused on cameras. But as I said in the beginning of the stream before you joined, we will have more chip stuff to cover down the road. Actually, like for example, we now have more data on the Dimensity 9400. That one is based on the ARM X925 core, which should be like almost like the new IPC King because it gives you very solid single core results at between 3.6 and 3.8 gigahertz. I've seen some conflicting results. Some people say it's 3.63. Some say it's 3.78. Here it's the 3.63. So that's interesting. Of course, there are some Snapdragon 8 Gen 4 results that, again, I do not want to cover when the results we currently have are for like 18 watts, which has nothing to do with like smartphone behavior. And I will be watching the Geeker Van video at some point, but today it's a smartphone review, smartphone and review analysis. This my channel is kind of known for it. If you go back to last year, you'll find I did react to the same types of videos from SuperSaf. and Mr. Who's the Boss, and I also reacted to the Petapixel review last year. So those are all traditions we're kind of keeping up with. But of course, I also tell everyone, whenever you join in, you're free to suggest content that I can and should react to. And if you combine that with like a super chat, you're much more likely even to succeed. And that's how we all profit from each other.
Details better compared to the iPhone. Now, one thing that I notice pretty much consistently, and what we've noticed consistently from Samsung cameras, is that they tend to have more of a vibrant, more punchy look, where the greens pop as well as the blues. The iPhone, on the other hand, tends to go for some more neutral colors and can look a little bit muted in some instances. However, we do have the next generation of photographic styles.
Nice,
So, we've had
nice, good
photographic styles
acknowledgement.
on iPhones for a few years now. However, I didn't really find myself using them in the past years because I didn't want to set a particular style and stick to it. Because
Yeah. By the way, you could edit those by a little bit. You can still edit tone and warmth. You weren't beholden to Apple's like specific plus minus 50 values. But okay, I guess you cannot be forced to know the details when you do that for a living.
Baked into the image. With this next generation of photographic styles that we've got on the new
Or,
iPhone 16.
or maybe he means it's just that you would have to switch a lot between the different setups, even if the setups are good enough. I don't know. I just always complained when people were always saying, oh, the iPhone image is too warm. And I'm like, literally, if you complain that about in every image, you can just go to photographic styles, go to warmth warmth minus 10 or minus 15 and be happy. Like this is bullshit because it's not as complicated as picture by picture exposure level tuning and stuff like that. If you don't like the default choice, there is so much computational photography in there that having some customization over it, I know might seem frightening, but if you trust yourself to already not like the default behavior, then you're basically like, you owe it to yourself to edit it at least a little bit.
You don't have to set a particular photographic style and stick with it. You can change it after the fact, and this is not like applying a filter. This does have a lot more data to work with. So what we can do simply in this example is go for more of a vibrant photographic style, and this more closely matches what we've got coming from Samsung. So if you are somebody who prefers...
You can see, by the way, still that the colors are still more natural. So you can see that those are not Instagram filters that just randomly oversaturate everything in the image.
Vibrant, more punchy colors in your photos. You're going to be able to easily do that on the iPhone. I have left pretty much all of the photos at standard because I can change them later on. Now with the iPhone 16 Pro Max, with the primary camera at default in good light, it shoots at 24 megapixels. The Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra at default shoots at 12 megapixels. Keyword there is default. So if you go in 100% to both of these images, you'll see that we will be able to crop in much further on the iPhone image compared to the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra.
I mean, you can still crop in how
that,
much you
course,
want.
We do have a high resolution on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. We've got 48 megapixels on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and up to 200 megapixels on the S24 Ultra. Now on the S24 Ultra, you have three stages when using the primary camera. You have 12 megapixels, 50 megapixels, and 200 megapixels. So initially, if we compare the 48 megapixels resolution of the iPhone 16 Pro Max to the S24 Ultra at 50 megapixels, at first glance, the S24 Ultra looks a lot sharper. But if we look closer, you can see that there is a lot of post-sharpening happening. This is not true sharpness.
The lines
like
were just like redrawn with a Sharpie.
The bricks have kind of merged into this sort of texture, which is not the bricks. And although this might seem pleasing...
That's very fair. This is actually something that I've seen him get wrong in the past. I think he has seen a lot more like Pixel AI stuff and stuff like that. I think he has become more aware of like that post-process sharpening can actually look good. We might actually desire it. I would argue on the grass it looked decent, but if you ever looked at that house and thought that like, oh, that post-process sharpening is actual detail, no. Try to actually understand what is the actual texture that should be there, what pattern of like visuals should occur, and is that post-process sharpening even somewhat reflective on that, and it's clear that it just almost drew like random lines at that point.
To distance, I am not really a fan of this over sharpening. Now,
Nope.
when we shoot at the full 200 megapixel resolution of the S24 Ultra, you'll see here that we have that brick detail and it hasn't over sharpened it. So I'm not too sure why Samsung is over sharpening that 50 megapixel output, but at 200 megapixels.
From what I understand, their 200 megapixel mode is super slow, right? So that's data that the 50 megapixel mode doesn't even have. The entire point of why default is 12 megapixels is because beyond sharpness and everything else, people mostly care about speed on smartphones. So they care about the photo being in focus, and they care about it being sharp in the sense that nothing that is relatively close to the camera is mushy, and they care about the fact that they can just take it out, the focus happens fast, the sharpness comes relatively fast, which of course the sharpness does involve some of the processing pipeline. But yeah, and again, the default here on the iPhone is very neutral, like in that regard. So I would have definitely applied to photographic style here.
You can get lots more detail. Now, low light from the primary cameras, I think both of them do a good job overall in low light. In this example, I prefer the iPhone. If you look at the shadow detail, it has been better maintained. Now, in this example, the Samsung has maintained better detail, I would say, in the shadows and also in the highlight areas. If you look towards those lights, they have been better maintained on the S24 Ultra. However, if we look at the sign with the S, that sort of neon light has turned into a bit of a magenta, whereas the iPhone has better maintained the reds of that light. Now, in this example, I prefer the iPhone overall. It has better maintained details in the shadow areas. But in this example...
one thing that I would like to see him say in a lot of those scenarios, now we aren't there yet, but when we are talking later about night mode photography, for example, I would always like to know what was the exposure time and was it 1:1, right? Like when the iPhone takes 2 seconds, but the Galaxy takes 4 or 5 seconds, I expect the Galaxy image in general to be better, and of course vice versa. But just from my own experience with iPhones, I know that Apple doesn't actually really like going beyond 3 seconds at all. A lot of times, even in dark scenarios, they will just default to just 1 or 2 seconds of night mode. And I know that Galaxies like to take their time, which I don't even begrudge them that, but that obviously takes away some of the more scientific nature of tests like that. And guys, you can see, like, have been watching the video for about 12 minutes and we have gone as far as 4 minutes and 20 seconds. You see, we can actually get through a video somewhat quickly if it's not done completely haphazardly and bafflingly bad, like the Verge video from yesterday.
For the S24 Ultra, because
by
the
the way,
iPhone still has those flare dots, I don't know what you want to call them, but those balls of light that reflect off the lens. Now, we are supposed to have this anti-reflective coating, I believe, but this is still present, and you'll see that it's also present in video later on. Now, in this example, at first glance, the S24 Ultra does seem to be the better image. We seem to have...
The grass is basically completely artificially drawn in. Like, not for a second do I believe that the Galaxy actually thinks like that the actual sensor thought that that's what it looked like. I prefer the color of the house on the Galaxy. Of course, I cannot know which one is more true, but like the focal point seems to be very different. Like it seems like the focal point on the Galaxy might have actually been on the fence, while the iPhone definitely focused on the house. So the house looks better. Quite honestly, I don't think either photo is good. Like the iPhone is better. You can see the detail, by the way, here on those bricks, I guess. Like there, it looks like authentic detail. Here, just as gray mush at this point. But like neither of those photos is something that I would want to post or anything. I guess just like. I guess maybe there's a utility perspective if you might have wanted to capture a photo here of something that like you needed to show. Maybe your neighbor is like vandalizing your fence and you were actually trying to photograph the neighbor during it. Who knows? I needed once to do something like that when we had the neighbor who were walking their big dog who was actually jumping on people without the leash, and police was actually called on them, and they promised to stop doing that. And then I saw them like a month later once again walking their dog without the leash, so I took a photo and used to warn them again. Yeah, so I understand there's some utilitarian perspective here, but yeah, I wouldn't take either photo and like frame it or anything like that.
More detail in the shadows. However, there is still a lot of over sharpening happening. So if we zoom in 200%, look at that brick texture on the S24 Ultra, which has kind of gone into a bit of a mess.
It's completely made up. It's not real.
Very well on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So I think post sharpening does help a little bit sometimes, but I do feel that the S24 Ultra tends to over sharpen at times. Now, an indoor low light shot, the iPhone is winning here. You've
by
got
a lot.
crisper text. And the other thing that I
this looks a generation ahead almost.
As well, is that it's much easier to shoot in low light with the iPhone compared to the Samsung. You can see the example on screen here. You're pretty much shooting in the dark, so you're shooting blind.
This is what generations of optimizations of the image signal processor with the actual like sensors that Apple uses has come in. This is why I've said, while I would like a newer, larger sensor, a faster sensor in stuff like this might actually be better, right? Again, there is the benefit, of course, that the newer sensor in general is better in many ways, but if you specifically make sure that it gives you a faster readout, that gives you more data for computational photography, that gives you more data for live previews like this, and that helps tremendously, especially for the layman. Of course, I know that like the pro guys will say, well, neither photo is like super real, but yeah. By the way,
Ultra,
I think we can
pretty much shooting in the dark, so you shoot to the Samsung. You can see the example on screen here. You're pretty much shooting in
by the way,
dark,
you can actually see that the Galaxy took 4 seconds while the iPhone took 3 seconds. So actually my complaints about prior like unscientific methods by the likes of SuperSaf, unfortunately, in that regard. And guys, please let me know, do you agree with my approach? Do you think that my criticisms are valid? Those are actually important points for me to know, because if my audience entirely disagrees with that, I will have to put you guys over my knee and spank you, or you will have to try to make a cohesive argument on why I'm wrong. There are only 2 ways about it. And I enjoy giving a good spanking, so feel free to come out if you disagree.
So you're shooting blind when you're using the S24 Ultra. It doesn't really give you a good preview, whereas the iPhone really brightens things up so you can see what you're shooting. And because of this, I do prefer shooting with the iPhone in low light compared to the S24 Ultra. Now with the ultra-wide cameras.
Sorry, do you want to remind them of the hands-on comparison we're working on?
Oh, yeah.
And, can I take a break now, please?
No. Who's going to edit the videos then?
Okay.
Get back.
Bro,
get back.
You're at 2.11 million subs. Each and every video of yours has like 100,000 views at least. You have editors, believe me. Oh, do they give a shout out to who edited the video? Sometimes they do. Official video, chapters. No. Oh, maybe he edits them themselves.
As SuperSaf reminded us, that I am working on a full detail comparison of the iPhone 16 Pro Max versus the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. If you want to see that first, then be sure to...
I actually am not too interested in that this year, because the 15 Pro Max was already winning most side-by-side comparisons with the S24 Ultra. I'm very interested in how the 16 Pro Max fares in battery life tests by the likes of Mrwhosetheboss, but I don't know, side-by-side comparisons, maybe if the video is relatively short and to the point, maybe I can watch it with you guys.
And hit that
As
bell
always,
icon.
let me
That
know
video
if you
will
actually
be
want
live
me
in
to
the
watch
next few
something
days.
like that.
Of course, there is much more to look at between these phones, apart from just the cameras.
Yeah, but also I would argue that at this point, you're probably not considering a Galaxy S24 Ultra if you're actually an enthusiast. And if you are considering a Galaxy S24 Ultra, you're probably considering it at such a low price, like probably around $800 or so. So it doesn't even really compete with the 16 Pro series. But then again, Apple doesn't need it to compete with the 16 Pros, because the 15 Pro was already beating it in many areas. And of course, the 15 Pro has now gotten cheaper if you want to find it like discounted from carriers or tech stores. So yeah, I don't know. know how interested I am here.
Ultra-wide cameras, I think both actually have very good ultra-wide cameras overall. Lots of detail and dynamic range. Now, the sharper overall look with the Samsung does help with the ultra-wide camera I've found, but the iPhone does have a higher resolution. We've got a 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera this year. Now, I really wanted to test this out.
True.
So
Samsung is only going 50 megapixel ultra-wide next year. They do have the higher resolution telephoto cameras.
An image with the 48 megapixel camera and compared it to the 12 megapixels that we've got on the S24 Ultra. And going in 100%, the iPhone doesn't seem to be too sharp. And this is something that I consistently found. When I shoot at 48 megapixels on the iPhone, the result isn't very sharp. It seems to be softer compared to what we get out of the primary camera. Now, granted, I know
yeah, I would actually say I'm not a huge fan of Apple's choices for the sensors and I know that I've seen that for example the new ultra wide sensor is better in low light, but I have to say I would have really liked a sensor that is legitimately larger, at least one sensor. It's not too much to ask for, and also it's in a 1.4 micron pixel sensor. Like once you consider a quad binning, that's really not impressive, regardless of if the sensor is relatively new. Getting it to 1.8, maybe closer to 2 microns, sure, that would be a pretty large sensor, pretty expensive at that point for the ultra wides. But given that you didn't give us a larger main sensor this year, given that you didn't give us a larger telephoto sensor this year, given that you didn't give us a larger selfie sensor this year, which by the way, Apple's selfie sensors are super small at this point. They're 1 by 3.6 inches, so they're ridiculously small. So yeah, I'm definitely not below criticizing Apple here.
Wide camera sensor is not going to be as good as the primary sensor that we've got on the iPhone, but this is something that I consistently did find. And this was particularly the case with low light photos from the ultra wide camera. Generally, they were just softer compared to the S24 Ultra. And in many situations like this one, it's just too soft for my liking, even though it's a higher resolution camera. Here's another example. Once again, I think the S24 Ultra is doing a better job with the ultra-wide camera in low light compared to the iPhone 16
Again,
Pro Max.
Apple increased megapixel count, but didn't increase sensor size. Could result in worse low light results. It's not what we have seen in... was it Dave 2D who mentioned that yesterday, saying that it actually performed better for him than the 15 Pro Max? Which is weird because I remember the 15 Pro Max basically coming out even with the Galaxy S24 Ultra. So maybe there's some small differences just from the perspective that you were capturing. I mean, I can still see the house better on the iPhone.
Now, for macro images, in this example,
okay, well, the iPhone wins.
I prefer the iPhone. The S24 Ultra has kind of blown out some of those highlights. But in this example, the sharpened look of the S24 Ultra actually helps. The iPhone has more detail in the shadow areas.
Yeah, that's real detail, though.
But the S24 Ultra, for this macro shot, just seems to pop a little bit more, which I like. Now, we can shoot at 48 megapixels while focusing in close, but this doesn't work for the macro feature that automatically initiates when you're using the primary camera.
What?
You actually have to go to the ultra-wide camera on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and then just focus in close. And this is the results that you get at 100%. Now, yes, I could probably add a bit of sharpness to this in post, but I do think it'd be nice if Apple did push a bit of sharpness on some of these macro images. Right now, the telephoto cameras. So both of these devices have a dedicated 5x telephoto camera, but the S24 Ultra has
By the way, now again, I still am inclined to say though, with those night mode images, now I have to ask, what was the exposure time for each of them? Do we once again see a situation where it prefers the shorter exposure time, and you, for some reason, even though it's ridiculously easily to manually tune on both devices, for some reason couldn't give us a comparison between 1 second each, 3 second each, 5 second each? Look, I know you guys capture hundreds of images, but either give us the information to know how valuable your data is, or give us all the possible data so that maybe we can decide what actually matters, right? Just giving us a night mode photo but never telling us the details of how exactly is what it was captured, except for default, which again, default behavior, like if you actually operate like a modern smartphone a lot, you know that night mode can change like between 1 and 3 seconds on a whim. Like you just slightly change the angle and it already wants a different exposure time. So again, some methodology issues here that I still take some umbrage with. Maybe I should try contacting him, SuperSaf, but I don't know. He probably won't like me because we have different political views. I don't know.
Telephoto camera at 3 times. Now, both devices can also shoot at 2 times with pretty much lossless quality because it's using the middle part of the larger sensor. And I'd say at 2x, they are pretty much neck and neck. But when we get to 3x zoom, this is when the optical zoom camera of the S24 Ultra kicks in, and it's going to give you better results compared to the digital zoom that you've got on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. With this image, if we blow it up to 200%, you can see that we've got a sharper image on the S24 Ultra, and this is going to carry on all the way up to around 4.9 times. But when we get to 5 times, this is where the 5x zoom cameras kick in. Now, firstly, let me just clarify that although both are 5 times, they have slightly different focal lengths. So when we do put them side by side, you'll notice that the iPhone does go in a little bit more compared to the S24 Ultra. And at 5 times, I'd say things are pretty much neck and neck. But when we extend the zoom to 10 times, then you start noticing that the S24 Ultra gives you sharper results. And especially when we push this to around 25 times, you can see that the S24 Ultra is giving you a sharper and cleaner result. Now, this seems to be because Samsung has tons of experience with extended zoom for many, many years, and they have really applied this to the S24 Ultra. The S24 Ultra can also go up to 100 times.
Yeah, but the main thing here is that it has a slightly larger sensor here.
Zoom, if you ever want to use it.
Again, why is the amount of images compared so small? Has that changed from year to year?
I mean, it's not going to give you great results, and unless you're a stalker, I'm not sure why you'd be using this, but hey, I almost forgot. The moon. People love taking pictures of the moon, so let's touch on that because thankfully there was a full moon during my week of testing between these two devices. Now, starting off at around 10 times, you can see that the Samsung has straight away noticed that there's a moon in the picture. And
the moons are fake, by the way. We have seen that now time and time again. Whatever Samsung does to change moon specifically for the moon, like I'm not saying like there are detail that they draw in that doesn't really even match sometimes the perspective of the moon. Almost, am I wrong? Does it not look as if the like? Again, I don't want to speculate, but I've seen like people on like Korean forums, for example, posting like, oh, here's the moon, right? And it's only half the moon. Half of it is obscured in real life. But then Samsung basically draws the full moon over whatever was obscuring the moon in real life.
Has adjusted the exposure accordingly. The iPhone has overexposed that moon a little bit. And when we go to 25 times...
Yeah, that is when it becomes completely made up. That is not real. If you believe that this is real, you are 100% a moron.
Again, the S24 Ultra has now kicked in the moon mode. It's made everything else dark and it's fully focusing on that moon. Now, yes, it does use AI to sharpen things and make the moon appear more moon-like. And the closest we can...
Yeah, but the issue is, at this point, you're not taking a photo of what you were actually taking a photo of. You see, by the way, there are a little bit of clouds covering it, right? You can see there's a cloud here, cloud down there. There is none of that left over here. It just gave you a pretty moon picture, like that is about the same size that it would be what you're seeing in real life.
Get with the iPhone is by tapping and pushing the exposure right down like I've done here, but it's still not going to give you the proper moon picture that you're going to get with the S24 Ultra. And of course, with the S24 Ultra, you can go 100 times and get this image, which is going to look pretty much the same anywhere in the world because the moon is tightly locked to us and we see the same side every single time.
I'm not talking about same side. There's still differences in perspective. Like it's okay. It's okay, Mark, chill. Like, depending on time of day and stuff like...
If you like taking pictures of the moon, then you might want to get the S24 Ultra. Now, I was praising the extended zoom of the S24 Ultra. However, that was in good light. Let's see how it performs in low light. So firstly,
using the 3x zoom on both devices. Of course, we've got optical on the S24 Ultra versus digital, and the optical is going to give you a sharper image. But when we go to the 5x zoom cameras, this is where things start getting interesting.
Yeah, it's the same thing as it was with the 15 Pro Max.
That the iPhone
It's
gave you
again, I'm saying this now 20 times, but and we will probably get through Mrwhosetheboss's video quicker because at that point I will have set my piece. But I wish like the sensor that they put in the ultra wide would probably be perfect for the telephoto, because it would be like a 20-30% larger sensor still. It would go from 12 megapixel to 48. It does cover a significantly smaller area, like literally 10x less than the ultra wide has to cover. So like if you were to ask me, let's say we are using the 2.44 micron size pixels on the main sensor as a baseline, I would argue that I'm fine with like 1.4 on the telephoto if the optics are right for it, which Apple has managed optics pretty well. The stabilization on their telephoto seems to be pretty much the best right now, which of course they have gone for a smaller sensor and stuff like that, so there are compromises. But so larger than the 1.1 micron size pixels currently on the telephoto right now, the 5x one. And then on the ultra wide, I would probably want it to be like 1.8 micron, right? Of course, once the main camera becomes larger, I would want the other sensors to follow at least slightly in lockstep. I understand that obviously at some point the cameras then get ridiculously large, the costs start accumulating, but to me, just the quality difference between the main camera and especially the ultra wide has always prevented me from really utilizing the ultra wide. I would always just prefer walking back. So, oh, by the way, 5x telephoto, like, how much? No, if it's a 10x zoom, that's literally 100 times less that it covers than the ultra wide, right? Because 2x it shows you 1/4 of the image. Yeah, the math has left me.
Sharper overall result. So you can see here we've got the 10 times zoom, and we can read that text pretty clearly on the iPhone. It is a bit of a struggle on the S24 Ultra. And when we go to 25 times, you can see that the Samsung is trying to sharpen things up, and in doing so, it's actually blurring the text a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's not blurring the text. This is AI gobbledygook, which also happens with Apple. It seems like this generation is actually less AI prone than the 15 Pro, because I have seen the 15 Pro make some stuff up. But yeah, when you look, for example, here at like what the Ring has done here, you can see like definitively that he is wearing a ring on the iPhone, right? Here, he, for one, his hand just looks, it probably saw hair here or just shadow, and it just drew in fat lines. This is why when some people say, oh, post-process sharpening is not a big deal, like if you know how to edit images in the slightest, you prefer an image that has basically no post-process sharpening because you can edit it in yourself. Whenever the camera does shit like that, it's basically impossible to edit out afterwards. Now again, you can argue that this kind of image probably like is bad enough on both to not be taken seriously, like you wouldn't frame either one. But even for utilitarian perspectives, like let's say there was a sign here that you might have actually wanted to read, and let's say for some reason you didn't want to do that with your own human eyes, you didn't want to come closer, like the iPhone definitely does a better job in that regard. And then, yeah, you can see here how the shadows here actually pitch black, right? So there's no accounting for like contrast. It's all just pitch black. Yeah, definitely a much better image on the iPhone.
Whereas the iPhone is actually giving you a better result. So for extended zoom, yes, in good light, you've got the S24 Ultra, but in low light, I'm gonna have to give it to the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Now let's take a look at one of my favorite sections, portraits. So here we have portraits with the primary cameras. And I think both actually do generally a good job in terms of edges. Yes, we've got the differences in color, but once again, you can't just put on a photographic style. Now, because the iPhone shoots at 24 megapixels from the primary camera at default, that also applies to portraits. So you're going to be able to crop in much further on the iPhone than you're going to be able to do on the S24 Ultra. Now, the next step for both of these for portraits is 2x. This is using the middle part of the sensor, so it's still
again, I still feel like there is also just like some stuff of the analysis missing though. It's like, oh, it's a portrait mode and it's sharper, right? I can see even here from the background that the gradual fall off was much better handled on the iPhone, so it's much more natural, the bokeh depth of field. Now, this is the main sensor still, so this will be like a more natural look. But yeah, it's like, give me something about the skin tones here and stuff like that. It's actually interesting to know what you would think. Like,
lossless. And once again, I think both are doing a pretty good job. In this example, I think the S24 Ultra has kind of overexposed my neck area, but
who cares? Like, literally. Like, this is the kind of exposure stuff that I really don't care about. Like, I didn't care about when the iPhone had issues with that. I didn't care about it when the iPhone was as good as the competition. I don't care about it now that the iPhone is definitively better than the competition. Like, those are such small issues. Like, even if you look at like people outside under strong sunlight, sometimes your eyes will just see their skin glistening and reflecting a lot. Yeah.
The blacks are more true to life on the S24 Ultra compared to that of the iPhone 16 Pro Max.
Really?
Now, the step after this on the S24 Ultra is 3x because it has that dedicated optical zoom camera. The iPhone does not have this. However, you can just take a picture at 3x on the iPhone and then apply a portrait effect to it after the fact because it does capture depth information. And you can see here that both are doing a good job. However, if we do blow these images up 200%, you'll notice that thanks to that optical zoom quality on the S24 Ultra, you've got a much sharper result compared to the digital zoom that we've got on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Now, the next step on both is 5x using the telephoto optical zoom cameras.
Ooh.
I'd say this is my new favorite.
Ooh, that looks actually really good, and the iPhone looks fantastic here. Like, this is where a contrast really comes to shine, because when he said previously, like, oh, the Galaxy was better at exposing black, it was barely a difference. In this image, now there is like this slight thing where the colors look a little bit too bright here on the iPhone, but everything from his skin tone to his hair to like just even how this one hair is still like really well done. This is actually a portrait photo I would really, really like to use.
Focal length for portraits. Both have done an amazing job in terms of edges. But I have to say, the iPhone's edge detection is exceptional.
Yeah.
If you look towards my hair, you can see a few of those wisps that it's also managed to cut out perfectly. And this makes it look so much more like a natural portrait rather than something that's been applied artificially. Now, here's another example of the 5x portraits. Comments below if you can recognize the meme. Now, in terms of edges, I think both are doing exceptionally well.
I cannot recognize the meme, but I'm not too much into every meme, I guess.
But I do prefer the overall colors and the more punchy look on the S24 Ultra. Now remember, we can apply the photographic styles on the iPhone and completely change this. So if we put on a bit of an amber profile, which I personally prefer for my skin tones, look at that. Now it looks absolutely great. So yeah, I gotta say, I am a big fan of the photographic styles on the iPhone, and I would definitely recommend trying it out and tweaking things till you get something that you like, because everybody's personal preference is different. Now, from the selfie cameras, I think both actually take very good selfies overall. In this example, if you look at the color of my top, it's been better maintained on the S24 Ultra, as well as the color of my beard. But in this example,
I thought the skin tone looked much better on the iPhone.
Because it has maintained the details in the background as well as the foreground, whereas the S24 Ultra has blown out those highlights in the background. The S24 Ultra has once again done the same thing here. In order to brighten up the foreground, it has lost those highlights in the background.
It's such a shame if, like, we know about the relative little change coming to smartphone hardware with the Galaxy S24 Ultra, like to the cameras. We know the ultra wide is going like 50 megapixel, so the ultra wide will probably be definitively better than the iPhone. But like I believe the Galaxy S24 Ultra has quite the larger selfie sensor, and you can still see, look at the difference in detail how the iPhone wins. Like I don't know. And here, like, look, I know this is why I hate when people just say, oh, iPhones give you warm images, like that piss filter. It gave his skin, like, this is not a natural brown. It's like, I don't need to tell you that when we actually look at him. Why can't I just look at him? Here, that's not what his skin looks like. He doesn't look orange. Like, I know he might be under a cooler light here overall, but the sun isn't yellow, like orange yellow. Like, no. Like, those skin tones, like, yes, I know the iPhone might look not quite vibrant enough, like, not quite brown enough, maybe. But, like, in this image, I would definitely prefer, like, as if I were a brown individual, I would definitely prefer like this over this. Like, it's just like it's very unnatural. Like, and you can see that it's not just his skin, by the way. Like, you could argue, oh, maybe his skin is that way. Well, are you gonna tell me the grass also has that unnatural super warm tint to it? So this idea that Apple just always gives you the warmer image, maybe that's true versus the Pixel. It's definitely not true versus the Galaxy, though.
To the S24 Ultra. Now we can take portraits from the selfie cameras of both devices as well. I think both do a great job overall.
Ooh.
Once again, the edge detection on the
Though, like like whatever Apple is doing to just like give you a nice contrasty image, though, maybe I would actually prefer the skin tones here for once on the Galaxy. But by the way, let me just, if I am correct, I am here in GSM Arena already. So S24 Ultra, its cameras, its selfie camera, it's 12 megapixel. We don't know the size. It should be like the iPhone's selfie sensor. It's about the size of the 10 megapixel 3x telephoto in the Galaxy, from what I remember. It should be similar here. So maybe there is room to actually improve the selfie a lot on the S25 Ultra, but like I can go to 15 Pro Max because those were definitive stuff. Like, yeah, it's a 1x3.6 inch sensor. So that 3x telephoto on Samsung is really garbage. It's basically barely better than just doing 2x natively on the main sensor. And yeah, so the main sensor is slightly larger than the Galaxy, and the telephoto here should, in my opinion, be getting upgraded to at least this size. And yes, unfortunately, with the 48 megapixel, we are barely getting anything larger. Let's see if they have some statements on the size here. 16 Pro Max. Ultra wide, so we do have the same telephoto. Yeah, it's 0.7 micron. Yeah, so if you double that, we are at 1.4, so the same size on the ultra wide. And yes, the statements here on the selfie camera is the same. What about the aperture on the S24 Ultra for its selfie? So it has a worse aperture, so that's maybe where, even it has, as far as I understand, a larger sensor. Maybe this is where the iPhone actually manages to collect a little bit more light and look in general more pleasing. Yeah, but let's continue.
The iPhone is just exceptional. Look at the wisps of my hair. But when you do shoot with portrait mode from the selfie camera of the iPhone, it does punch in a little bit. However,
you can zoom out.
A normal selfie and then apply the portrait effect after the fact. And once again, if you look towards my hair and my beard, you can see those wisps of hair. So this is not just a portrait filter applied or anything. This is using true depth information. But yeah, I wish Apple just gave us the option of taking ultra-wide portrait straight away rather than having to do this process. Now for selfies in low light, I am not using night mode for selfies because you can never keep your hand still and it just gives you terrible results. But using the front-facing flash, I do prefer the S24 Ultra here. I think we've got
I have said that in basically every single time where he used the front-facing flash. I would never, like, I know Apple made like a celebrity ad, although many years ago, I believe on the iPhone 6s when they introduced front-facing flash. Like I always said, it just always boggled my mind that, like, again, for utilitarian perspective, like what would it be like? You have a skin lesion that you want to take a photo of with the selfie for some reason, right? And it's dark, you don't want to wake up your significant other. Like, I don't know, I would have to make some shit up here, but yeah, both images are terrible. I wouldn't use either one. You can see how the Galaxy is soft and everything. The iPhone is noisier but technically a little more detailed. The skin tone, I would argue, is better on the Galaxy. So, but yeah, both images are crap.
Much noise on the iPhone. And I just went outside in the dark like a weirdo in my backyard
Yeah.
to take this picture. If any of my neighbors saw me, they'd be thinking, what a weirdo. But
Yeah,
anyway,
what are you
once again,
doing
I
here,
think
man?
We've got a cleaner result on the S24 Ultra. Now, before we go on to the video, let's talk a little bit about AI. So, Apple Intelligence is not here yet officially. It's going to be coming later on next month. And it will have some image editing tools like being able to remove people from the background. You can do this right now using Galaxy AI on the S24
Yeah, but
Ultra, and it does a pretty decent
you could
job.
see
Now,
from the
obviously, I
speed
can't
of
do a
it that
side-by-side comparison as yet,
this used
but
the
one of the
online
things that
version.
I
This used the
actually
cloud
love on
version,
the
even though it
S24
technically
Ultra
should be
is
able.
sketch to image.
Yeah, I
this
hate
is something
that
was
shit.
introduced on the Galaxy Fold, but I've got the latest update on the S24 Ultra. Don't worry, for all those people who are going to be saying, did you have the latest update? Yes, I've got the latest update. And sketch to image lets you just draw an image, and it uses AI to generate maybe a hat on your head or changing your outfit, or you could have a cat in the background. Who knows? Now, this might not be too serious, but I actually think it's a lot of fun, and I have really enjoyed playing around with it, especially with the S Pen. We'll talk about some of those AI features in another video. Right, now looking at lots of samples.
By the way, like,
video.
yeah, you can have those features on the iPhone too, with like, and you can arguably have them in a better way with Google Photo, which again, you can also have them that on the Galaxy series, and you will have to pay at some point on the Galaxy for those features because those are completely cloud-based when it comes to actual like image generation stuff. So no. That has nothing to do with the camera, by the way. If it had anything to do, if it would have like something to do with the Photos app or even photo management, I guess. But yeah, this has nothing to do with the actual camera.
The thing I have to say is that Samsung has definitely upped their game compared to previous years. And I said this when the S24 Ultra initially came out. We've got excellent quality video with great dynamic range, and it really does go head to head with the iPhone.
No.
Even if we use HDR on both and then export it out to standard dynamic range,
I can still see the over-sharpening on the Galaxy video.
Range. Now, I would still give the edge to the iPhone.
Yeah,
I
no
think,
shit.
from all of the different lenses when it comes to versatility. And this is in particular the case with cinematic video. You saw the intro scene, and the iPhone is just better. It's sharper. It's got better edges. The Samsung can get a little bit confused sometimes. And one thing that I've noticed is that if you pause a still from both of the cinematic videos and then you zoom in, you'll see that the S24 Ultra is very soft. It loses a lot of that sharpness, and it almost seems like it's actually a 1080p video that's being scaled up to 4K and not actually a 4K video. I'm not saying this is what's happening. I'm just saying that's what it looks like because the result is so
to be
soft.
honest, that was way too soft even for 1080p. So maybe the internal processing resolution of those spatial, no, it wasn't spatial video, but like cinematic modes is super low. Who knows?
Can adjust the blur after you've taken the video.
Yep.
You can't do this on the S24 Ultra.
Making it actually useful. Like, this is what I've always said. Like, if you plan on maybe capturing it and you capture it, right, and it turns out crap, like, you can slightly adjust it, you can turn it off. I believe you can turn it off on the Galaxy, but like the versatility that you have on the iPhone is just unmatched.
Video, I think both.
And it's not like I even care about cinematic video. It's just a fact.
Pretty well here in these examples. But remember I mentioned those light dots? Well, they are still present here on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. And if you are in a scene where there are some lights about, you will be getting those lens flare balls, unfortunately. Now, when we do have extreme low light video, then the iPhone does give you a much cleaner result. And it also has a brighter output when we are using the ultra-wide camera in low light. And yes, you can now finally pause video on the iPhone when you're recording, something that you've been able to do on Samsung devices before. Now for stabilization,
I didn't even know you couldn't do that because I never thought of doing it.
You can see that both are very, very stable, but we do have their respective stabilization modes. Action mode on the iPhone and super steady on the S24 Ultra. Now when you go into these modes, at default, they will use the ultra wide cameras. And when we do test this out, once again, you can see that both are very stable, and I can't really pick a winner between these two. However, when you're using these steady modes and then you go on to the primary camera, then the iPhone, once again, is much more stable. And we've seen this on previous generations too. So because of that, stabilization, my pick would be the iPhone. Now, the S24 Ultra does have 8K video. This is something that we don't have
Nobody
on the
cares.
iPhone 16 Pro Max. And 8K video has been improved compared to when it initially started. And this gives you a ton of detail, and it also gives you the ability to crop in and change your composition if you'd like to.
I mean, you can crop into
now, when it
4K
comes to
as
the
well.
zoom cameras for video, I noticed that in good light, they were pretty similar. But in low light, the S24 Ultra has much less noise and it gives you a sharper overall image. So I did prefer the zoom camera.
No, but I mean, like for utilitarian perspectives,
Now, both do have
yeah.
some pro features. On the S24 Ultra, you've got pro video mode, so you can control things like your ISO, white balance, etc. On the iPhone 16 Pro Max, you will have to get a third-party app to do that. However, on the 16 Pro Max, you do have ProRes with log recording. So if you are somebody who's going to be
did you
grading
skip
your
over
video
4K
later on,
120
you're gonna absolutely love
recording?
this on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Now for slow motion,
Oh, yeah.
both devices now record at 4K 120 frames a second, and you can see some examples here.
And you can see that only one of them
Both can
actually
also
manages
shoot
to give
at
you decent
1080p,
contrast.
240 frames a second. Now, although both devices can only use the primary camera when shooting at 4K 120 frames a second, the iPhone can shoot at 1080 240 frames a second from all three of the cameras, the ultra wide, the primary, as well as the telephoto. On the S24 Ultra, you can only do slow motion from the primary camera. For the front facing camera, I'd say both are very good. The iPhone is wider, which I prefer. Now for the audio, have a listen. Audio test from the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Back to the iPhone 16 Pro Max and now the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. So this was using the default mode on both devices. However, the iPhone now does have a new audio mix mode. This lets you record in spatial audio, and then you can go in and then you can either choose in-frame audio, studio, or cinematic. Here are some examples. Audio test with some background noise. As you can see, we've got a washing machine running here in the background.
Really good skin tone capture, by the way, here.
The iPhone 16 Pro Max can cancel out with audio mix. Let's see how much of that background noise the iPhone
Definitely
16
a
Pro Max
reduction.
can
You can
cancel
still
out
hear
with
the
audio
humming.
mix. Let's see how much of that background noise the iPhone 16 Pro Max can cancel out with audio mix. Let's see how much of that background noise the iPhone 16 Pro Max can cancel out with audio mix. Now, what's amazing about audio mix is that it can really do a great job of eliminating the background noise. However, it can sound a little bit artificial to my ears. If there are any audio experts, you can let me know down in the comments below. But although I did like it, and I think it's going to be very useful for particular situations, I don't think I'd always be using audio mix for all of my videos. So that
Wait,
is
but you
SuperSaf's
can still
camera
keep
comparison
standard
between the
in
iPhone
there,
16 Pro
right?
Max and the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. I want to emphasize that both of these have excellent cameras, and these camera comparisons are so difficult to do these days because we are putting the best against the best. Now, of course, there are certain areas where one is better than the other. I would say that I prefer the iPhone overall when it comes to low light, and it is my go-to for low light images. I also absolutely love the next generation of photographic styles, which gives you so much more flexibility. And I would say overall, the iPhone does have better video, especially when it comes to features like cinematic video. The S24 Ultra, however, does have that dedicated 3x zoom camera. So between 3 to 4.9 times, it's going to give you better results compared to the iPhone, and it's also going to give you those 3x portraits. The S24 Ultra also has better extended zoom in good light, and it also has the option for 8K video. And currently, it has a lot more AI features, which are a lot of fun. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think?
Okay, so he didn't even declare a final winner. But yeah, the iPhone to me, one, I think the fact that like the iPhone tries to give you a very neutral image by default. Almost a little bit too neutral, I guess. Which is so weird how the Verge video then tried to declare it like just like super over processed. I guess they just meant that it seems to favor like higher exposures with like less shadows. But yeah, like to me, the iPhone won this very clearly. Though the Galaxy does remain very competitive to even winning in certain areas, I still say that I'm not super happy with what Apple has done with the ultra wide, just increasing resolution without improving sensor size. I think the Galaxy gives you a very competitive image in its ultra wide camera. With the telephoto, there is this difference between in bright light, I would argue in very good light, Samsung wins, and then Apple absolutely destroys it in low light, and I would still argue the iPhone wins in like medium lighting conditions. Especially because it also has like the better focus and sensor stabilization on its telephoto. Which of course matters more in low light conditions. So yeah, I think beyond actually my issue with the low light stuff, where I said I would really like to know what the exposure time was on some of this, right? Because in the one example where I actually showed it as a video, we saw that the iPhone took 1 second less, 3 seconds versus the Galaxy S24 Ultra's 4 seconds, and the iPhone still gave you both a sharper and brighter image. So that was why I slightly doubted his results, especially for the ultra-wide camera in low light, because they also contrasted a little bit negatively to the result that we saw from Dave 2D in the last video that we reviewed. That being said, I think that this is probably the SuperSaf video that I had least issues with methodology wise. I would have preferred to probably see actually more images, and I would have probably preferred to see more examples with the photographic styles. He's shown like how it fixes the image. I would have loved to see like where he would have just zoomed in and showed you that the photographic styles are actually lossless, like that they don't magically create false contrasts or shadows, nor do they delete stuff that was already there. But overall, I think it's a good video with very solid conclusions, with very fair analysis. So shout out to SuperSaf. Not that, of course, he needs it from a channel 20 times smaller, 15 times smaller, I guess. Yeah, you can, of course, let me know whether you agree or disagree with SuperSaf, whether you agree or disagree with me. I know we have now been talking a lot about cameras, but guess what? We are coming to one other camera thing, and I hope tomorrow we might take a break from cameras and then maybe do something slightly camera related on the weekend, but we'll see. Mrwhosetheboss, 16-minute video, so definitely slightly on the shorter side. I'll play it back in 1440p. This is why I didn't pre-download these videos like I usually do. So if there's any internet issues or something like that, that probably comes from that, because I just didn't want to deal with 1080p with low bitrate. That is the what you get, what you pre-download the video. I wanted at least 1440p. 4K wouldn't really make a difference given the size of the image, like that it puts out on my 14-inch MacBook Pro. So 1440p it is for now.
Is the iPhone 16 Pro Max. This is the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. When we compared the Samsung to last year's iPhone, Samsung won with 6.5 points to 4.5.
Yeah, and like several of those points were like AI bullshit and stuff like that. So I actually completely disagreed with him. I know, by the way, that the results will basically flipped. I've been spoiled with that information, unfortunately. So which probably means that the actual result might be like, in my mind, like 6.5 or 7 to 3, because I do not count any of the AI stuff as like worthwhile including, again, in a camera review. It's not a photos review. It's not a system level function review. It's a camera review, and I think this stupidity about including so much stuff about like AI into real camera stuff stuff, it just boggles my mind. I very much prefer like what the petapixel guys deliver in that regard.
And so the question is, can this new iPhone with its capture button, faster and higher quality shooting, improved ultra-wide camera and close-ups, better microphones and a lot more software features re-emerge as the king of smartphone photography? Or has Samsung, with all of the updates since launch, actually pulled even further ahead of the iPhone? Oh yeah, and the phone that wins this test is the phone I permanently switched to. Oh my god. That's gonna be me.
Let's start with sound quality. You're listening to the Samsungs right now, and it sounds good. iPhones and Samsungs have been pretty neck and neck when it comes to this for years now. But this year that changes, because now you're listening to the iPhones. Apple has upgraded to 4 microphones instead of Samsung's 3. They're apparently higher grade studio microphones, whatever that means. But also, Apple has paid particular attention to wind noise reduction, and you can tell, I mean, this is the best sounding audio that I have ever heard on any phone.
With the additional option now of selecting whose audio the phone...
Which, by the way, you see how that wasn't really that apparent in like the selfie audio comparison, the selfie video audio comparison in SuperSaf's video, but here it's like instantly apparent. I don't know if what he showed you was right away going to the studio mode or something like that, or the in-frame mode to be more precise, but you can definitely see how like just the individual scenario where maybe the wind is just blowing right into the microphones, and Apple having one extra microphone just makes all the difference in the world, right? Where maybe the wind's coming from behind you, so it doesn't actually hit the microphones. It just is kind of noise to them. And in that regard, the Galaxy will do good results too. So yeah, definitely the audio is just unfathomably better actually in the iPhone if you look at its real capabilities. But the point is that unfathomably better might sound like, well, why isn't it like 4 or 5 times better? Well, because we live in an era of diminishing returns. To go from like 90% perfect quality of perfection to 92% is infinitely harder than to go from 10% to even like 25 or 30%, because it's such a steep climb to take in the end, right? And this is why, because let's say 15 Pro Max and Galaxy S24 Ultra were both at 90% already of like perfect audio quality, at least relative to smartphone sizes. Of course, if you compare them to a dedicated microphone that is just a mic, that becomes different. This is why, again, I've said it in my previous video, this is why I have a Shure MV7 Plus in front of me and not another iPhone. Though probably in that regard, the Shure is also the better value if you look at it as like a single use case device. But yeah, if the iPhone 16 Pro Max now allows the iPhone to climb from 90% of possible audio perfection on a smartphone-sized device to 92%, that's an incredibly impressive jump over the still 90% on the S24 Ultra.
Is on, since the thing now records 360
And
degree sound
liking.
by default. So, last time sound was a draw. This time I feel very confident handing the win to the iPhone 16 Pro Max. And while we're at it, how's the video quality?
Well, the iPhone 15 Pro Max was already ahead of Samsung when it comes to video, so now that that's been updated to the 16 Pro Max, it pretty much smokes the Samsung on all fronts.
So that's in terms of the ultra-wide camera. Can you see how the iPhone is both wider, so it gets more in the shot, while also having the same amount of detail when you get up close, even though you have to punch in more to get to it? It's in terms of dynamic range, the ability of your phone to evenly expose your shot, so you don't have something that's too bright or too dark. But look at the trees in the background here. Can you see that Samsung has kind of lost the information in them? Now let's be very clear, the iPhone isn't always better. We did find in a few scenes that the iPhone was
I mean, the iPhone is better here.
trying to make things too balanced, but to do that it had to make the dark areas unnaturally bright. But
yeah, but it's a smartphone. This I will have to stick out a little bit here for Apple, like an Apple, like a well-behaved Apple sheep here. This is the nature of small sensors. You are not in any way, shape, or form ever getting this, like, you will need to balance this stuff out, right? You see the higher detail here that you get because it's a little bit higher exposed. You will never get, unless every single sensor on the iPhone is like at least 2 inches in size, right? You will never get that freedom to say, oh, I do want my dark areas to be like naturally dark and still have my detail in bright areas or whatever. Like, no, on small sensors, especially as those sensors are still even below a full 1 inch, you have to make those compromises. And once we go to the ultra wide, which is like 1 by 2.5, and once we go to the telephoto, which is 1 by 3 inches in size, this is where we really hit like real limits in photography.
It's better on average. Apple is also better when it comes to noise. If you look at the brickwork over here, you can see that you don't even need to go to a night scene for Samsung to start looking a little grainy and soft. And I actually could not believe the difference between the two phones here. I think it's massive.
Yeah,
But
it's
the
a full
biggest thing for me is
generational
just
advantage.
detail. Like if you wanted to get in closer to
Like,
see me having the time of my life.
iPhones have had that kind of capability. Like, I would argue if you use like the 14 Pro Max, you would probably get about the same advantage. Like, you would probably get half the advantage over the S24 Ultra here. Then you get 75% of the advantage with the 15 Pro Max, and then 100% of what we see in the advantage of the 16 Pro Max.
Life on perhaps the most thrilling ride in existence, it's not going to look very good on the Samsung. Both phones do also have an action mode for when things get really out of hand, and they both make big strides in terms of smoothing out.
Okay, now we are getting into some complicated areas here, because I know somewhere in there he will have something like special modes. The issue is now action mode is apparently just part of video. Like, look at how much better it is. Arguably, you should include it in like the special modes too.
Out all of the absolutely insane acrobatics I was being subjected to on this roller coaster. But the iPhone's is slightly higher resolution and a little bit cleaner. The only exception that I could find to this rule is 8K. The Galaxy S24 Ultra shoots 8K video, and when you get the right conditions, it's actually really good, and it definitely trumps the iPhone. It's just, you have to get it right. You have to work around Samsung's other video shortcomings to properly take advantage of it, to the point where I think most people will prefer how the iPhone's 4K footage looks to Samsung's 8K.
True.
But things are changing when it comes to special modes. And this is basically extras that your phone does that are fun, but they're not part of the core camera experience. So that's slow motion, that's close-up macro mode, that's any kind of cinematic video mode. And last time I did this test, I gave the point to Samsung because of its ability to shoot slow motion in 4K, which was significantly better than Apple's 1080p. But now the iPhone can do 4K too. And actually, Apple's slow-mo is like when you're taking normal videos, just less noisy than Samsung's. It actually feels 100% on par with the quality that you get on your normal iPhone video mode. And the iPhone has also had an upgrade to macro, since the ultra-wide camera on the phone has gone from 12 megapixel to now 48, and macro uses this ultra-wide camera. So now the iPhone does take noticeably more detailed close-ups than Samsung. Apologies for the slightly strange example, but you'd be surprised how unpretty things look when you're 2 centimeters away from them. And then your portrait cinematic video is, well, I find pretty comparable between the two, but the improvements to the iPhone and the other things are enough for this special modes category.
Is it pretty comparable though? Like, you look here, like it's a completely different time of day. Like, this shouldn't even be a comparison. I guess he's trying to get, I assume he will get like 3 points out for the iPhone, 3 points out for the Galaxy, and then he will do like iPhone, Galaxy, iPhone, or one of them might be half a point and then half point, like depending on where he puts it. So it looks like it's going to be a blowout from Apple. Then Samsung strikes back, and then all the rest follows.
To swing completely from a Samsung win to an iPhone win. The one thing that only the iPhone does is spatial video, to watch back on your Apple Vision Pro. But I feel like it's a little early in the day for mixed reality headsets for that to be any kind of substantial perk. Besides, I feel like if you have a Vision Pro, you're definitely an iPhone user anyway. What about selfies? Well, there's a couple of things to bear in mind.
Samsung wins
First of all,
here.
that both phones can either shoot narrow selfies for just you, or wider to capture a full scene. And when you choose to go wide on the iPhone, it is wider. I wouldn't say there's a tangible difference in detail between the two, but
Jesus, this is always so shocking how well Apple leverages that at this point ancient 1 by 3.6 inch sensor for the selfie. It should be so embarrassing. Like for Samsung has jumped. Like, let us look actually at, again at GSM Arena. And again, I don't want to focus too much on sensor size. So what was the resolution of the selfie camera on the S23 Ultra? That's when we got 12 megapixel. Let's go with S22 Ultra 5G. So the selfie camera was 40 megapixels and larger than already the iPhone sensor is right now somehow. And by the way, we have kept now the same sensor size for the main camera on the Galaxy between the S22 Ultra, S23 Ultra, S24 Ultra, and most likely gonna keep it on the S25 Ultra. So while we have seen some changes here on the ultra wides and the telephotos, really they've all been kind of in cost-cutting measures. And when we look at the S21 Ultra, the S21 Ultra 5G to be precise, the selfie camera, again, 40 megapixels, still a larger sensor than what the iPhone has right now. And again, while we do have a low resolution, well, was the previous one 200 megapixels or was it also 100? So we have the same sensor size, but it's 100 megapixels. So we had now the same sensor size between S21 Ultra, S22 Ultra, S23 Ultra, S24 Ultra, and we are going to keep it on the S25 Ultra. Let it be at least S20 Ultra 5G. So still, by the way, higher resolution, larger sensor than what the iPhone currently has. And yes, that also means we have now kept the same main sensor size between the S20 Ultra, S21 Ultra, S22 Ultra, S23 Ultra, S24 Ultra. And yes, we're going to keep it on the S25 Ultra as well. What was the last generation before the S20 Ultra? Is there an S? No, there was no S11. There's the S10 Ultra. The S10. Was there an Ultra? No. The Galaxy S10 Plus? Oh, the Galaxy S10 5G, right? That one unironically the precursor to the dynamic island. The sensor. Okay, so at least we end up with an actually smaller sensor here. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Thank you, Rulai. I remembered. Samsung smartly switched to the S20 branding when we actually hit 2020. So that makes it easy to remember when each Samsung phone came out in each year. But then you go back and you remember that there was like a 10 jump in branding between the S10 and the S20. Let's continue.
So interesting how both of these phones have such a different style and interpretation of exactly the same scene, and yet they both also kind of seem right when you take them. So really, this one's up to you. But I do personally prefer the Samsung. I just think there's something about the...
I have to say, in some ways, I agree. The issue is, I think once you include photographic styles, the iPhone kind of has to win. Also, I dislike the idea of portrait mode being separate. I like it influencing like the actual like camera that you're reviewing. And I know that portrait is better on the iPhone selfie camera, and portrait, unironically to me, matters, well, if I have a pretty lady in front of me, of course I'm going to use the regular or the 5X. But on the when it comes to selfies, like, yeah, the iPhone wins in portrait mode.
Warmth of the skin tones, the vibrancy of the scenery. Oh, and also, Samsung does a cracking job at portraits, so portrait selfies look better.
No! What was that comment? Like we just this is where the lack of actual data comes in, where he took like, it feels like he took two portraits and he just liked the Galaxy more because probably the colors were popping a little more, because the colors pop more in the Galaxy in general, because for some reason, which gave great credit to SuperSaf, I believe his name's Aaron, Mrwhosetheboss hasn't yet mentioned photographic styles before that.
Phone does now have some new photographic styles that let you tweak the skin tone in your shots to exactly your preference. And I will say, the way that Apple sold this, the idea of you deciding how you want to look in your photos and then setting that style as your default and then always looking right from that point onwards is actually very enticing. But it's just that in practice, your skin tone is going to look different in every photo anyway because of all the other factors. And so if you really wanted to get this skin tone thing right, you'd probably have to go through like every single photo ever taken of you and tweak each one individually, which doesn't feel like a sensible use of time.
No, that's Okay, so he just didn't get what photographic style is about. It's a general adjustment for what you like. It's not about being perfect in every single image. It's accepting the fact that Apple has a default decision, which they will call like 000, right, in terms of warmth, exposure, whatever. And then when you dial it in for yourself, you are not breaking the entire image pipeline. You're just saying, oh, I prefer the end result by default to be a little cooler because that aligns more with my skin tone or whatever. And now with those more detailed photographic styles, you have a lot more control. That is the point. It's not about going back to old images or like, no, that's not. I'm sorry, Aaron. That was a big fail. And the fact that you mentioned photographic styles, for one, with the selfie, where you clearly, for example, prefer the portraits, clearly because of the color reproduction, which is fine, by the way, but you didn't make the like, he doesn't have the hair imperfections, I guess, that SuperSaf has, so he probably doesn't know. But yes, the iPhone selfie portraits are way better than Samsung's because they do have true depth data.
Video from these front cameras is every bit as important. Anytime you want to record a little holiday vlog, anytime you want to make a TikTok, anytime you video call someone, these are the cameras that you're banking on. And while I'm happy that Samsung is paying attention to the hardware in their front camera, they are definitely being let down with the software processing.
So have a look at this clip. Do you not think that Samsung looks more cinematic? Like I'm being filmed with a proper rear camera as opposed to a tiny little selfie camera.
What?
It feels more professional compared to the iPhone's more basic setup.
What?
But there are caveats. The iPhone camera makes me look better, for starters, pretty consistently. Samsung's got a real gritty vibe to it, you know, kind of like I'm filming the next Batman movie. The iPhone front camera is less grainy, too. You notice the Samsung really struggling when you're not in ideal lighting, and it's such a shame because you know that they've actually put a better camera on the front of their phone. But the biggest difference? Have a look at this. I created a burner Instagram account with 0 followers to see how well each camera takes footage directly within other apps.
And as you can see here, Apple has done a really good job optimizing the Instagram camera to retain most of the video and audio processing that
By the way, for all my criticism, that's a very, when I say he does sometimes have weird stuff that he does, I'll admit this is a very creative and actually very relevant for many people kind of test. Kudos, that's very, very good data.
happens in its normal camera app, but even when you're going straight onto Instagram. Samsung, not so much. And I feel like at this point it's less of a Samsung issue, it's more of an Android issue. There's too many devices on Android for Instagram to optimize for every single one. Both phones also shoot cinematic video on their front camera, which is good. I think it adds a lot of much needed depth to what could otherwise be quite a flat camera. I think Apple shoots in higher quality, but Samsung just gets portrait mode. I really like the style of it. But overall, we have to give selfie video to the iPhone.
But one part of the camera experience that I feel like gets very overlooked is the camera app itself. The
Oh
good
my
camera app is
God.
going to give you a ton of options. It's going to make shooting fun, and most importantly, it's going to allow you to take
Okay, if the Galaxy wins, you know he did it, so he didn't lose out by like 5 points. Because I know that the Galaxy will have like the Pro mode or whatever, but now that the iPhone has like the freaking capture button, the action button, and everything else in terms of versatility of just opening the camera, capturing a good photo, and dialing it in a little, it's just like, I know you can like triple click the camera button or the power button here, but like, come on.
what you want to take quickly. And on that note, the difference in shooting speed is now back to being large again. Apple used to be far ahead, then Samsung closed the gap, and now Apple is far ahead again, particularly when you're shooting using both phones' high-resolution modes. So this is Apple's 48 megapixel versus Samsung's 50 megapixel mode. And it's not just that it feels fast, it has a tangible impact on your photos. Like, look here, it's not just that the iPhone managed to stop the water earlier in its tracks, but it has actually stopped the water. You can see the texture inside of this stream, which I think is absolutely insane. And while you're probably not taking a lot of photos of frog fountains, the same differences will also apply to photos of family where someone's constantly laughing, or friends that don't listen to instructions, and kids that don't sit still. I would also say that the iPhone's app is a little prettier and a little more intuitive to use with one hand. Like, pretty much everything you might need to use is always a swipe away, as well as still being a little smoother and faster than Samsung's. But then Samsung's got some stuff going for it too. You get more settings, more control over exactly what you want your camera experience to be. But the big thing is, really, you'll probably have noticed this.
I mean,
throughout
you
the
still
entire
have settings for HEVC, whatever. Like, you just don't need that in the regular camera app all the time. Also, by the way, you literally have Pro Max, like Pro RAW stuff
Samsung's
here.
display is super bright, and the reduced glare that its screen picks up actually makes the photo.
Oh my god, we went literally from like the app is this, but now we are including the display reflectivity. This is what I said in yesterday's video when we went back to the example of Nilay from The Verge not giving the 2020 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon 10 out of 10 because he was afraid of being labeled an Apple fanboy. This is an example of that. This idea that like, oh my God, the display. By the way, in the environment that he is shooting at, it doesn't even matter that much. Like your displays are both plenty bright for that scenario. Like that is such a weird inclusion.
Taking experience tangibly better. So I'm gonna go for a draw on this one. And
Yeah,
yes, you can
okay, yeah, that was bullshit. Somehow not, wait.
control the entire Samsung camera app using just the S Pen and some air gestures, which
Yeah, the iPhone has the capture button. The iPhone lets you control it with an Apple Watch. Like,
is wildly cool, by the way. But you'll probably use it like once in your life.
Yeah, true.
And then yes, there is also the new camera control on the iPhone, which same. If you want to hear my rant on this button or
Okay, that's some nuclear grade bullshit. Like, what? You're gonna use the dedicated hardware button once? What? Like, I use my action button basically daily for cameras. Now I will be able to actually free up my action button for something else when I next year get like the iPhone 17 Pro Max.
not button, whatever you call it, that's in my unboxing video. But for the purposes of now, I'm going to say that it adds nothing of note to the iPhone's camera experience.
Yeah, okay, that's bullshit. Like, and some will be like, well, he actually has the device, he actually uses it. I'm like, yes, guess what? Who also, like, I have my iPhone 7 Plus here. I was actually looking to update it in terms of software. I occasionally like get it out, just charge it, update it, whatever. And it's like yeah, if like obviously it doesn't have the action button, right? But the mute switch has some functionality. But like to me, this is how I always take photos right now, right? Well, now I will just transition to this. Or next year, to be more precise. What do you mean? Or like one of the advantages before the action button to me was always that Samsung did let you do triple clicks to invoke the or double. I'm not even sure. On the power button, which Apple has Siri in there, Apple has the wallet app, and then there are accessibility features with triple clicks that for some reason don't map to camera, or at least they didn't used to. Maybe they do now, but of course I didn't need it since last year with the action button. But yeah, so that's saying you would, for one, I should stop calling it capture button. It's camera control. I wish it was the camera control button, to be honest, though, at least. So we still had like the word button in there. But no, that was a weird cop-out, I feel like saying, for example, I agree with him that you will use the S Pen once, but that has nothing to do with the S Pen remote control being bad. It has everything to do with where you're gonna prop up your phone, that the image is going to be so good. And for selfies, you will, like, maybe if you're using it, one scenario I can imagine where it's actually useful is you're holding a selfie stick, right? Maybe or maybe just a stupid stick and doesn't have a button to actually control your iPhone. Maybe you borrowed your friend's selfie stick and you didn't pair it with your iPhone. Let's put it like that, right? So you just take out the S Pen, you hold out the selfie stick, and you capture it. That scenario, as you said, might actually happen once in your life, right? But in that case, it's useful. It's similar how like Apple Watch control for iPhone camera, and I know that Galaxy Watches do that too these days. I believe that they do. The Pixels definitely do, right? But like that was useful to me twice ever since owning an Apple Watch, and I've owned Apple Watches since the Series 0. So you can imagine how often that comes up per year. But like the idea that a dedicated hardware button that frees you up for all your other buttons, because now you have the power button that gives you, of course, single click on and off, double click for a wallet, triple click for accessibility, long press for Siri. You have the action button. I wish Apple gave you like double click action button functionality, but at least it has single press functionality. Then you have double tap and triple tap on the back of the device for any kind of accessibility or shortcut feature that you might want to invoke. And now none of that has to be the camera, because I remember on my 13 Pro Max for quite a while I actually had my camera set on double tap on the back, because that feature was so good that like the recognition, and I guess it should now only be getting better and better as gyroscopes and everything improve, that to me, like, it was worth basically reserving that feature for cameras. And then I got the action button, and that was worth reserving for the camera as well. And now I would have a dedicated button that feels better because it's larger, it's in an objectively better position, and gives me even some software control over the direct camera, so the actual camera interface can be a little decluttered when I take an image. Yeah, that's an easy W.
And on the subject of the camera experience, let's talk editing. You might have seen that Samsung has full generative edit capabilities.
AI.
So you can pick up objects, you can move those objects, you can resize them, and the phone will fill in the blanks automatically. Samsung has sketch to image. You make a little doodle, and then the phone turns that doodle into a real object in your image, which is often fiddly and a little disappointing, but every now and again,
I thought it was
jaw-dropping-
like drawing flowers, but I guess it was balloons.
really impressive. And Apple has basically nothing. This is where you feel the consequence of Apple being late to the AI party. As of right
The Galaxy S24 Ultra is not even a year old. Apple being late here might be an argument against Google or something. Definitely not against Samsung. Like, Samsung's features are so unrefined for now. Like, it's so weird. Like,
Right now, the only AI editing feature currently announced is Cleanup, which is not bad, but it's coming later in a software update, and based on the beta, it doesn't feel as sophisticated yet as what other phones are doing.
that's wrong, because it's actually better than any other offline cleanup-like feature. But you would know it if you actually... I'll try not to lose my shit here. Again, this is why I'm telling you. I was actually... you know why I actually liked his Instagram like thing inside here? Because it was part of selfie videos, right? It was one part of a bigger analysis, right? It didn't change like an entire category, right? And if you wanted, for example, to combine the like that draw between like the camera app, which for some reason included stuff like the less reflectivity on the Galaxy S24 Ultra display. If you combine the camera app with, let's say, the editing inside the Photos app, some of the AI features, and just made this a win for Samsung, right? Like, I would have been totally fine with it. But now we have a category that's almost designed to make the iPhone lose, because obviously, like, Google does their AI stuff. Samsung borrows a lot of Google's AI stuff. Apple will never do generative AI the same way, because Apple still insists on regular photos in the Photos app to be real stuff. This is why their like their image playground app, for example, is designed for like sketch and cartoon styles. It's not designed to actually replicate like photorealistic things. And
And this is where I would say Samsung picks up a bit of steam, because I would say they also win when it comes to zoom, too. I remember when the S24 Ultra first came out, not being particularly impressed by zoom, but it seems like updates since that launch have brought it back up to scratch. Both phones have a 5x optical zoom lens, but Samsung's 5x is higher resolution, and it also feels like Samsung knows what to do with it better. It feels like they're not afraid to really dial up the software processing on images when you zoom in a lot, which not everyone's gonna love, but I think it's what these images need. We even tried a concert environment, and can you see how when you get super up close that there's not actually much more information being captured on the Samsung. It's just correcting the image way
Wait,
more
I would say the iPhone image looked actually way better.
aggressively and
What do you mean?
more information.
The exposure is better on the iPhone. It's much more uniform. The Galaxy image is a little bit blown out around here. You can almost read the text on the drums on the iPhone. The people that are a little bit closer to the camera are a little brighter on the iPhone. Well, not everyone. I guess that will depend a little bit. But like, what do you mean? This image is objectively better. Like, if I went to Oktoberfest, which again is closer to me, I guess, like I would much prefer this image. Like, look at just how much sharper this person is. The actual zoom was holding clearly much better.
Being captured on the Samsung. It's just correcting the image way more aggressively and
Yeah, but like when you're looking at the broader image, you're not zooming in 10x into a 5x zoom. This is fake information.
confidently. And
This
it
is
makes it better. Not to mention that Samsung also has a second zoom camera at 3 times.
By the way,
which just
I am fine with giving Samsung the zoom category, unless you would like deliberately differentiate between like night mode or not, because in night and in, I would argue, in darker scenarios, we clearly just saw the iPhone zoom win. But whatever. But when it comes to like bright scenarios, especially with also the added versatility of 3x, I don't think it's a big win for Samsung. I think it's maybe like 1.1 versus, or let's say it took 1 to win, so it's 1 for Samsung and 0.9 for the iPhone, but I'm absolutely fine to admit it. And then of course, if we just went bright zoom versus dark zoom stuff, then I would say Samsung actually wins like 1 to 0.6 for the iPhone, and then iPhone wins for dark zoom like 1 to 0.5 on the Galaxy.
helps to keep zoom shots high quality throughout the entire zoom range. And also, as I've alluded to earlier in this video, Samsung just gets portrait mode. Apple was the first company to do any kind of portrait mode well, but you can just tell that in the meantime, Samsung has really invested energy into making sure that their portrait mode becomes something special. It's got that magic combination of realistic...
I mean, the iPhone looks way... This is ridiculous. The iPhone looks way better. What are you talking about? Like, you can see the detail level, the individual hair, the exposure level. It's everything is better. You can see the... Well, for one, that is actually white. Is like the skin tone is so much better. What are you talking about? By the way, if you don't like the exact like f-stop level, you can just adjust it in software by a little bit. This looks so much better. What the actual F is happening? Like, how is that his conclusion? Guys, whoever is still watching, I know some of you tuned out because you're probably a little sick of hearing iPhone 16 cameras at this point. How is that his conclusion? That is mind-bogglingly different.
background blur that doesn't feel like too much and gently gets
You
more...
can adjust it. Just like you don't even have to go into portrait mode on the iPhone. You can just adjust it afterwards. The iPhone looks better here. Like,
blurred as objects get further away, with extremely good, reliable edge detection and colors
again, the iPhone actually gives you even like individual hair.
that pop. The key caveat is that these portraits were taken on the 5x zoom cameras, which favors Samsung because they've got a better one. When you take...
No! They don't. It's a larger one, but I would actually argue the 5X on the iPhone is actually in many ways better because the stabilization is better. I know I've talked a lot today about like sensor sizes, but the stabilization and the specific sensor that you use, between sometimes difference of using a Sony sensor, Samsung sensor, sensors of different generations and stuff like that, how you adjust the aperture, like it's this idea that Samsung's is like by default better. It's wrong. What is the exact sensor size for the 5X on the Samsung? Oh my God, S24 Ultra. The 5x telephoto. For one, it has a worse aperture at f3.4 versus the iPhone's f2.8. And I'm not too happy even with the iPhone's f2.8 to be precise. And it's a 1 by 2.52 inch sensor, so it's about the same size as the ultra wide. And the iPhone here comes at about 1 by 3 inches. So those differences in size, if everything else was created equal, I would say yes, Samsung has a better solution. But just because it has higher resolution, that difference in like aperture alone is really, really different. And once you include differences in implementation for optical image stabilization, which is vastly superior on iPhone, that to me just gets a little insulting to just call the Samsung solution better. If we go to the Pixel 9 Pro XL, and we actually look at its zoom camera, right? For one, you do have the better aperture here for a 5x camera. That's a very good aperture of 2.8. Well, it's the same one that Apple has, but you see the difference already to Samsung. But then it also has the larger sensor, right, that Samsung has. So while it might still lose to the iPhone in low light, we'll see how the actual benchmarks compare. My MagSafe refused to charge here again. I should get a new cable. I've tripped over this cable way too much. I've tripped over it again today. So again, maybe the magnets have started coming loose a little bit. Yeah, so this I would accept to say it's better, but not the Samsung one. Yeah, but again, those are details.
Portraits using the 1x main camera, then Apple does gain a big leg up because it can shoot 24 megapixel portraits instead of Samsung's 12. But I do think that portraits in general do look better when you're more zoomed in. So this one's for Samsung.
Okay, garbage opinion, garbage. Like, this is such bullshit. Like, we literally saw the difference is SuperSaf actually zoomed in on the photos. He showed where it was better at hair stuff. He showed it for the selfie camera. He showed it for the main camera. He showed it for the zoom camera. And what Aaron does here, he's saying it's better on the Galaxy. I like it better. Like, without ever explaining why. That is, like, for one, I always afraid whenever I correct my microphone that I click and turn it off. But like, what the actual F? No, Samsung lost that category and then some. This is an easy W on Apple's side. Like, at least it's a draw if you like preferred by yourself. No, like, you made up a category that's like has nothing to do with actual camera stuff. Like, you made it win because of post editing with AI shit. You really down played the advantages of having a dedicated hardware button for the camera. And then, by the way, when we talk about stuff like pro features, by the way, if you know you want a pro feature, for example, guess what you can do? You can, for example, you can set halide then to the action button on the 16 Pro and keep the regular camera on the camera control button. Right? All of those little details, again, some might say, well, is that what a regular consumer will do? No, but a regular consumer won't use the Pro mode in the Galaxy S camera app either. Most regular consumers will not do more than play a little bit around with the AI stuff. And guess what? I would argue that regular consumers, now that they might be informed about it, are actually much more likely to potentially care about photographic styles. But for some reason, he completely downplayed it as like, oh, you would need... My God, this is basically the opposite of my complaints, where last time I reacted to SuperSaf and Mrwhosetheboss back to back, I had more issues with SuperSaf. Now I have definitively more issues with Mrwhosetheboss. That's really disappointing. That's such an unnecessary L for him to take. To like, oh, I prefer the portraits, he says, and then never gives you anything. Like,
now, just before we get to the crowning of what is going to be my new phone, we need to talk about core photo quality and night mode. So the main change to photo quality with the iPhone 16 Pro is the new 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera. And it was definitely the thing to change, since this is the one area that I felt it was weaker than the Samsung in. But on first glance, there's not really a massive difference between the two. Unless you specifically use Apple's high-res 48 megapixel mode. But if you do use that, then yeah, Samsung just can't keep up because its ultra-wide is only 12 at maximum. Now, using the high-res photo mode, which Apple calls Heat Max, is not without compromise. It means that photos take a bit longer to capture, it means you don't get live photos anymore, and high-resolution photos also take up more space. But here's what I think Apple's done really well. I think the photos still capture fast enough, and Apple's HEIF file format is actually so efficient that a 48 megapixel shot on this takes up like half the storage of a 12 megapixel shot on this. So they made it
By the way,
convenient
this
enough
is why
that
I'm still like, I wonder like if Apple could give us even better sharpness and stuff like that often by just taking a slightly longer time and making the files a little bit larger. Because I think, especially now that on the Pro Max 256 is the default, I wonder how much you can gain from even just making the images like 20-25% bigger in size.
I will actually just keep HEIF Max on by default, and so the iPhone does become the much better ultra-wide camera for me. And that's mostly true for the main camera too. Technically, Samsung destroys Apple in terms of resolution. Samsung's main cam is 200 megapixel, Apple's is 48. But then when you really boil it down, the best photo quality that Samsung can take without some sort of major compromise in terms of processing quality or capture time is 12, whereas Apple's default is 24. You can take every normal photo on the iPhone in 24 megapixel without needing to change any settings or think about it or sacrifice anything. And that, I think, is a massive perk. And yes, you can, if you want to, take a 200 megapixel photo on the Samsung, but it's kind of like the whole 8K video thing. There are situations in which it will be amazing.
By the way, again, this is why I'm trying to tell you, iPhone does not try to always give you the same opinion of in every photo. You can see that when everything aligns, it can give you even higher color saturation, stuff like that, than the Samsung. But that's probably because Samsung was struggling here to capture all the data to feed 200 megapixels, while the iPhone was much more free with its faster image signal processor and a lower resolution to actually give you a much nicer image.
But only in absolutely ideal conditions. More often than not, I found that the iPhone's lower resolution shot will still look better. So I'm giving the category of photos to the iPhone. It's not a blanket.
I find it hilarious that from 11 categories, right, one of them is photos. Right? Which is like this idea that every point here is weighted the same. And again, this is credit here to Aaron there. He does not say that everything should be weighted the same against each other. But this should be like 3 points or something like that.
There are absolutely times when I think Samsung has made someone's face look better or has a nicer pop of color. But if we're going on averages, then 70 to 80% of the shots the iPhone takes, I think, are better. Now, based on what you've seen so far, you've probably guessed what happens when things get super dark. Samsung's video becomes noisy. That same thing that you noticed a little bit during the day gets exacerbated when the lighting becomes challenging. Look how much grain there is in the smoke coming out of this fire. Samsung also gets a little funky when it comes to color control. All of a sudden, why does my sky look so deep blue that it's like I'm sitting in front of a blue screen? Or when we tried walking to an area with lots of bright lights that weren't white lights, Samsung makes those colors so intense that you are actually losing detail on.
By the way, isn't it fun when you actually look at images and videos where there is actually a lot of individual light sources around you, and you don't see a lot of lens blurring on the iPhone, but somehow the second the iPhone ever shows lens blurring, it becomes this giant issue because you forget that 9 out of 10 video captures didn't have the issues. So it's also a perception level, because we are primed for certain things, we might expect that the iPhone performs worse when there are a lot of light sources that could be reflected, and then it actually performs 95% well, and still gives you the nicer video for all of that. So clearly what Apple is doing is working, but you forget that.
Lights are shining onto. But the night photos are quite comparable. This one was actually kind of shocking for me because this scene...
I mean, the iPhone looks so much better here. His face just looks like it was overdrawn with a Sharpie. What is he talking about?
was so dark I could barely see where I was going, and both phones rescued it. The only key consistent difference that I noticed between these two phones is
I like the Galaxy image here, I think, but it might be a small difference of what exact light. Maybe he was looking at a different web page here. The iPhone is more pleasing, I guess, here, but like I really like how the light shines upon him on the Galaxy. His face being a little warmer makes a nice contrast. I guess the iPhone image looks a tiny bit more mysterious.
things get dark, Apple lets your images get a bit grainy. Samsung will smoothen your image to get rid of grain and then add sharpening back into the photo to correct for that smoothness. Actually, this zoom shot is like the perfect example of my point. Can you see how, as we zoom into this tent to capture, I'm left with two very different looking images, in which neither feels wrong or better than the other. It feels like the amount of detail.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a noise versus over smoothing guy, but yeah, both of them are shit if you zoom in that much.
Being captured is pretty equivalent, but the difference in video is enough to swing this night category into Apple's court. So that means we have a complete score flip. In the last test, it was 6.5 to Samsung and 4.5 to the iPhone.
Yeah, and if you remove some of the garbage scores, it's more like it's actually more like 7-3, but okay. Like I guess I cannot be too angry, and I'm just gonna delete that freaking AI-based editing shit.
This time it's 6.5 iPhone, 4.5 Samsung. The new iPhone isn't the most exciting iPhone upgrade, but the camera improvements they've made are important ones. So this is now the phone that I'm going to switch to. And do you want to know why I've been completely comfortable?
Okay. Guys, we will be wrapping this up. Again, I did promise you that there will be more stuff to come. Given just the history of my channel and the fact that I've reacted to SuperSaf, Mrwhosetheboss in the past, I'm not even sure how necessary the petapixel video is going to be. So please, this is actually one time where I really, really care about you telling me what you would like to see me react to next, because I'm a little torn what to do next. Right now, today I will be nicer to my voice, I guess. So Geekervan, they are Chinese, so this is where, and ironically, they have exactly half as many subscribers on their English channel than they do have on their Chinese one. But they did just publish their what? They did just publish their A18 Pro review, but I'll need a little bit more data, maybe from some other sources to compare some of it. I might do it tomorrow if by tomorrow I have a tiny bit more data. Not sure. Again, I still would like, and I know I've actually showed to this website a couple of times, but at this point, I would love to see the benchmarks that GSM Arena usually does. That being said, I would want at some point to give you a double feature between what this Tony Northrup guy had to say versus the Petapixel guys. Don't know. I might take a day off tomorrow, so don't hang me on that. And then the next video will either depend on if we get more benchmarks for 18 and 18 Pro that goes beyond Geekervan. Maybe we'll get some surprise extra information on the Dimensity 9400 or the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, or this camera controversy escalates in some ways. So I will make it dependent on that. If you really want to make me understand something, which one is more important, make that known in the comments, or follow me on Twitter and let me know there. But that's about it for today's video. I need to summarize that much. The iPhone definitely won, in my opinion. The iPhone definitely, in my opinion, could have performed in some areas better, where I think that Apple could actually apply more post-processing on the telephoto camera. I think that whatever Apple is doing with the ultra-wide definitely still needs a little bit of work to fully leverage its higher resolution better. but overall, between night mode, between the regular main camera, between video, between all those different modes from 4K 120 to action mode to now even just the camera control button that makes it easier to actually capture stuff, and especially over to photographic styles, which was one thing that the Verge video really praised. I believe the iPhone won, and then in certain categories the Galaxy had some good points, like high good lighting quality zoom, and in some scenarios I preferred its ultra wide stuff, and I guess in 20% of regular photos it might perform even slightly better than the iPhone, might draw with it in like 30%, but then in 50% the iPhone will be slightly better or even a lot better. So that's, I think nothing here is too much of a surprise. The 16 Pro is very much a refinement of the 15 Pro. I'm very much more excited for the 17 Pro as a 15 Pro user myself, and I guess we'll see each other in at least next year when I cover those reviews, and by that point I will also own a 17 Pro, because I'm definitely buying the next generation of iPhone in the way I didn't buy the 16 Pro. But that's about it for today's video. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. And last shout out to do the YouTube jazz, to if you haven't yet liked the video, to please like it, subscribe to the channel, share the video to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment, please comment afterwards, not just live. It helps tremendously with the algorithm. And beyond that, if you want to support this channel directly and you catch me live, please feel free to send a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker, or becoming a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon if you want to support this channel in the long term. That's about it for today's video. Thank you so much to anyone who tuned in or watched it afterwards. It all helps a lot. And I'll see you guys next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.